Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I want to talk about the 2028 presidential election, and specifically I want to talk about the governor of the state of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. And I've seen a lot online and even in my own comment section talking about how strong of a candidate Andy Beshear is, and even the possibility of him winning in type of a landslide election in 2028. And look, while I think it's certainly possible that could happen, I kind of want to pump the brakes a little bit and just go over some recent election results in recent history and just show you why I think the talk of an absolute landslide for Andy Beshear may be a little bit premature among Democrats. So here's the thing. Based on the past few elections, right now you could say Andy Beshear, or whatever Democrat, would start out with around 211 electoral votes. J.D. Vance, the Republican who I'm going with as the Republican nominee for the sake of this video, I would say starts out with about 218. And this leaves about 109 electoral votes that I really see as battlegrounds. And the argument being made with Andy Beshear is that since he's the governor of the state of Kentucky, he has very high approval ratings, which I'll be getting to in 1 second, that Beshear can change the map. He could potentially make states like Kentucky competitive, Ohio competitive, Iowa competitive. And look, it's not impossible that Beshear could definitely make Iowa and Ohio competitive. And I get, being from the state of Kentucky, that Democrats will think, okay, well, he can win the state of Kentucky. The big disconnect here, I think personally, is separating local state politics and national politics. Because don't get me wrong, when you look at the approval numbers, and I'll pull them up right now, the latest, Andy Beshear has a very high approval rating, one of the highest in the entire country. He's net 43% approval rating as the Democratic governor of Kentucky, and I'm not taking that away from him. He is certainly a very, very popular governor in Kentucky. If he were to run for re-election again, if he wasn't term limited to 2 terms, if he were able to run for a 3rd term, he would probably win re-election. I think he would. But being the popular governor of a state is usually politically at the national level much different than being governor. And just to show you one example, my mind immediately goes to right after 2017. The most popular governors in the United States were Charlie Baker, the Republican governor of Massachusetts, and Larry Hogan, the Republican governor of Maryland. Larry Hogan's approval ratings in Maryland were always very, very high. And a lot of Republicans are making the argument of, well, if he's so well liked in Maryland, then not only would he do well nationally, but he could also likely win the state of Maryland in the presidential election. And then I think reality hit him a little bit when he ran for Senate in 2024 against the Democrat Angela Alsobrooks, and Alsobrooks won by 11.8%. And don't get me wrong, 11.8% for the Democrat being the Republican of Maryland is very, very good. Because if you go back to 2022, the prior Senate election, the Democrat won by 31 points. In 2024, it was only a 12-point win. So Hogan being the candidate absolutely gave the Republicans a better chance at winning in Maryland, but the fact is Hogan still lost, and by a pretty handily margin. This is the problem when we talk about politics, is trying to equate local success to national success. And this is the problem. When it's a presidential race or a Senate race, it's a lot more nationalized than a governor's race. When you're a governor running of the state, you're really able to focus on the issues that everyday people in the state care about. You can talk about local taxes, local businesses, local labor organizations. You can talk about everything from business to healthcare to all the local issues the state has to the environmental issues, things that are very specific to the state. When it's a national race like president or Senate, things are immediately brought out to the overall national talking points of their respective parties. So what I'm saying, for instance, in the case of Andy Beshear, without a doubt, I think he's one of the strongest Democrat candidates for the 2028 election. But would Andy Beshear, in my mind, win the state of Kentucky? No, I don't think he would. Could Andy Beshear do well enough where Kentucky would not be the safe Republican state that it usually is? I would say that's possible. I would absolutely say that's possible. In 2024, Donald Trump won the state by 30.5%. In 2020, it was won by Trump by 26 points. The last time Kentucky didn't go for the Republicans, you have to go back all the way to 1996, when Bill Clinton, who won a very big election, won by only 0.96% in the state of Kentucky. Since then, it was likely a Republican, it was a safe Republican in 2000, safe Republican in 2004, safe Republican in 08, safe Republican in 12, safe Republican in 16, safe Republican in 20, and safe Republican in 2024. Would Andy Beshear, who was the governor of the state, being at the top of the ticket, all of a sudden mean Kentucky would flip to the Democrats? In my opinion, absolutely not. Could that mean Beshear makes the state more competitive? Absolutely. I absolutely expect he would. Again, plus 43% approval rating is nothing to scoff at. For a Democrat in a super Republican state, that's excellent. And that's great for Andy Beshear, but that doesn't mean he's going to be able to win his home state. Governor races and presidential races just don't carry over that way, because when candidates run for presidential office or for Senate, the second they get the media attention of both the local and national media, you have the national parties going at each other and making statements and claims about the candidates. Voters soak that stuff up, and the opinions on the governors start to change. That's why Larry Hogan, despite being super popular in Maryland, lost his Senate race in a closer margin, but he still lost. If Andy Beshear were to run for president, I certainly think he would do very strongly, but that 43% approval rating, I would not be stunned one bit if that approval rating were to get cut in half the second he had to go be a national candidate in the Democratic Party, because then he'd be hit by many Democrats, I'm sure, for not being far enough on the left, and then he would likely have to adopt some of his positions or change some of his rhetoric to be able to play enough in a Democratic primary. That usually happens in primaries. The candidates run farther to the extremes of their party because primaries are typically the farther, more extreme voters of the party turn out and vote for those candidates. Voter turnout usually is very low in primaries. So they're trying to get as much attention as possible, which hurts their overall opinion or approval back at home. But this video is not supposed to bash on Andy Beshear and his potential dreams of running in 2028 and winning in 2028, but it's a little bit supposed to be a reality check. Because if Andy Beshear were to run, I think, don't get me wrong, he would be very strong. He would probably cut the margin of victory in Kentucky in half and maybe even get it under 15 points. But that doesn't mean he would be able to win the state just because he's the popular governor. That's what I'm trying to say. And I know, especially if you're a Democrat who likes Andy Beshear, I'm sure you're going to hear what I'm saying and completely write it off and say, no, you watch, come 2028, Andy Beshear will win the state. And maybe you'll be right, but I highly, highly doubt it. But that doesn't mean just because Andy Beshear wouldn't win his home state of Kentucky in the presidential race, it wouldn't have dividends for other states. Ohio and Iowa are two states that have been trending the Republican direction for years. Andy Beshear being at the top of the ticket, I have them both as likely Republican. Again, due to that national environment, maybe the margins get a little bit worse in the states with the Republicans, and Beshear being the candidate has an effect. That could certainly happen. But where Beshear being at the top of the ticket, I think, really matters is being able to get moderate voters and independent voters and maybe even some Republican voters in the states that, no offense to all the other states, that really matter when electing Republicans or Democrats statewide. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, all states that were crucial to Donald Trump winning in 2024. What if Andy Beshear being the governor of Kentucky, what if that really appeals to people in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and Beshear can win all three of these? Well, that gets Beshear up to 255 electoral votes. All he would have to do is then win the state of Minnesota, win the state of New Hampshire, and then win Nebraska's 2nd district, all three of which were won by Kamala Harris in 2024, and Beshear's the next president of the United States. So Beshear, just because he's the Democratic nominee, doesn't mean he's going to win his home state, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have other important effects to other states around the country. But what I'm trying to get through the point of this video is, just because you're a presidential candidate, it doesn't mean you're going to automatically win your home state, especially if the state is voting consistently for one party over the other. But that doesn't mean it won't help and have an effect in your state and on other states around the country. And look, it's 2025, 2028 is a long ways away. Right now, the early polls so far show President Trump's approval rating around 45%. We don't know what it's going to be come November of 2028. If the election were held today between Andy Beshear versus J.D. Vance, I think it'd be very close. I think we'd probably see some toss-up states go for Beshear, some go for Vance, but Beshear would probably win a very close election if it were held today, in large part due to the fact that Republicans still love what Donald Trump is doing. Democrats still hate what Donald Trump is doing. But independents so far in the polls show they're pretty much evenly split, but are a little bit more disappointed in Trump than like him, based on the early approval polls, which again show Trump around 45% approve, 52% disapprove. The simple fact is, for a Republican not named Donald Trump, the voter turnout with numbers like this are going to be a little bit difficult. And with Beshear, who again is highly approved of in the state of Kentucky, being a more moderate Democrat and someone that I think a lot of independents and moderates would feel resonate with them would give the Democrats a stronger chance of winning in 2028, in my opinion. The question will be, well, firstly, does Andy Beshear even win the Democratic primary in 2028? The early polls so far don't even suggest he's near the top of the field. Right now, Kamala Harris is the leading Democrat, followed by Pete Buttigieg, AOC, Cory Booker, Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro, and Gretchen Whitmer. So of the moderate governor from the Midwest route, Beshear's not even in the top three for that, or top two for that. Shapiro and Whitmer both outpoll him in the early polls so far. But this kind of gets back to a common problem in American politics, which is often the most electable and strongest candidate for a general election almost never seems to win the primaries. And it's usually because, as I mentioned, the primary is usually where the extreme voters come out and vote. The ones that are really dedicated to the party get out and vote. Andy Beshear in the recent race to the White House average only has 2.3%. But if he were to actually be the candidate, I think he would be a pretty formidable one. But again, we're a long ways away, and I'm not taking anything away from Andy Beshear. But just because you're the governor of a state that doesn't typically vote the way it does at the presidential level does not guarantee success. You will probably do much better than a typical Democrat or Republican would in that state, but that doesn't mean you're going to win it. It doesn't mean it won't have a lasting effect on other states, but it doesn't guarantee you're going to win your home state. But make sure to leave a comment below telling me your thoughts on this video. Make sure to click like as well and subscribe. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.